Hey y'all, welcome to Austin Design Week 2021. Good on you for being at this one. This is going to be a fantastic discussion on futuring your design career. I'm Chris Tyre. I'm a program lead with Austin Design Week, and make sure that you share this experience online by tagging Austin Design Week on Instagram and all your favorite apps. Want to say that we're excited to do this. We got a lot of events planned this week. Hopefully you've attended some of them. If not, there's still a lot more tomorrow and Friday. And I also want to say thank you to our sponsors for their generosity in making all this possible and keeping the events free, both virtually and around the city. All that said, I'd like to pass it over to our host, Janice, the talented design manager at Atlassian, to get things started. Clap it up, even if it's a clap emoji.
Awesome, thank you. I'll stop sharing. Where do we go? There we go. I'll stop sharing this so you can see our panelists a little better. Let me sort my windows here for a second. What's going on over here? Zoom is messing me up. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Chris. And welcome, everyone, to Futuring Your Design Career, How to Craft Your Path in the Design Industry. My name is Janus Hegmund. I'm a design manager at Atlassian, and I have the honor to moderate tonight's panel. Over the last 2 years, many designers, many of us have started to reassess their careers. Like, do I still love what I do? Is there something maybe more meaningful out there that I could be doing? And the quick rise of remote and hybrid work has accelerated this and started challenging these conventional design paths, career paths, and what used to be these established truths, I think, are now a little more malleable, right? They're a little more open to change. And so it's tricky to craft a career plan when everything is shifting a little bit and the rules are changing. And so tonight we want to dive into that and how we can work our way from and through this uncertainty, this ambiguity, towards an inspiring blueprint for a career, for growth, for realization, for meaning in design. And we've got a fantastic panel. And before we get into introductions and talk to the panelists, I want to encourage you in the audience to be part of tonight's event and be active in the chat. Comment, share your thoughts, ask questions. We're going to have some Q&A at the end. So please feel free to use the chat liberally and let us know your thoughts. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to our panelists. I want to start with a round of introductions. And I want to ask each and every one of you on the panel to please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what your first job was. It doesn't have to be design related. And I'm going to pick Natalie.
Hi, y'all. I'm Natalie Armendaris. I am a co-founder and design director at a product design agency here in Austin called FunSize. As a design director and a founder, I do a lot of business operations, marketing, employee experience, client experience. I also oversee a lot of work on our teams across multiple projects. Before founding FunSize, I started really early in the mobile era at RGA, working on the Verizon team in New York. And then from there, went over to a company called Fjord before they got bought out by Accenture. I was leading things like pulling from memory here, like Citibank, F1, NFL, some mobile projects, really fun. And then my first job, I think I was a dim sum cart pusher at a Chinese restaurant when I was 15.
Right on. Awesome. Who do you pick to go next?
Ooh, I will pick Fiona.
Beautiful. Hi, y'all. My name is Fiona. I go by Fee sometimes. I'm a creativity coach and designer. As a creativity coach, I support people throughout the creative process, either through tangibles, like helping people get projects done, or intangibles, like deepening their relationship to creativity. I'm also working on a virtual art school right now. Let's see, my first UX job was at Morgan Stanley right out of college. And my first job was, I was a summer camp counselor.
That's great. Awesome. Thanks.
I was a summer camp counselor at a Jewish summer camp, but I'm not Jewish. Yeah, my pleasure.
I have so many questions about that. That's fantastic. Who do you want to pick next?
I will pick Daytriana, and please tell me if I say your name wrong or said your name wrong.
You said it right. Thank you. I'm Daytriana. I am a writer, storyteller, and designer. I'm a product designer at Twitter currently. I know Giannis from my time at Trello/Atlassian. Yeah, I transitioned to design from a career in like strategy consulting, did like a complete career pivot, went to grad school, got an MFA in interaction design, really doubled down on the design thing, and used that as a way to sort of transition into tech. So now I focus on like the health and safety aspect of design at Twitter. My first job was, I'm from Chicago, and so I worked at the White Sox Stadium as like a guest services kind of person, just like walking around answering people's questions. And it was kind of a weird job to have in the summer because you didn't know what time you would get off work because baseball is notoriously long and boring, per my own opinion. So that was kind of a fun job to just like have my friends be out while I was like still trying to figure out when we were going to leave. But that was my first job.
That's cool.
I'll pass it off to, I'm like, Panda, that's not what you said your name was.
Yeah, I go by Panda these days. There's two other Amandas on my direct team, and they both have last names that start with S, as mine does. So I'm differentiating. Yeah, I'm Amanda, also go by Panda. I work at Atlassian. I've spent about 5 years helping build the design team there as a recruiter. And the last few years have transitioned into management and now lead our global internal mobility team. But I've always been so in love with recruiting and talking to designers. I always found designers the most interesting people to get to know and understand and help, guide through the interview process. I spent most of the time I was recruiting designers, living with total designer envy. I took the General Assembly visual design course. I took the UX design course. Ultimately loved recruiting enough to stay doing what I do, but I found a lot of value in those courses. And my first job, I was also a cart pusher. I was a cart pusher at a retirement home. So I pushed around the little cart and served people their dinner and jellos.
That's awesome. Great. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. I'm so excited for this conversation. I mentioned in the intro that the last 2 years have been pretty special. And I think something that I've heard a ton about is the great resignation, or some folks call it the great realization. And I'd love to hear from you over the last 2 years, what's been your biggest realization about design careers and design career paths? I'm just going to post this open to the group so someone can jump in, or I'll pick on someone.
I will say my sort of great realization is like, so much of design is like having a good conversation. And after 2 years of being home and like going through my own sort of personal mental health journey, I think sort of like my communication style and figuring out how that works remote, especially because I did change companies during the pandemic, it just kind of brought me back to like the sort of fundamental things that I learned in school that were not anything related to like UI, which is what I think people think of as like capital D design. But before you get there, like, do you have the right people in the room? Have you documented what your goal and your intended outcomes are? All of that stuff is like easy to sort of throw to the side because we do this all the time and we should know and whatever. But it's like, nope, that's actually what we should sort of go back to when it seems like things may be like in a disarray. And so that for me was just like, all right, this is a nice portfolio, but what I really want to do is like focus more on my storytelling and focus more on my facilitation and how do I bring along my peers and colleagues so that we can get something done. And having kind of experienced a similar experience as other people while also very different, being home for almost 2 years, I think that you realize your personal and your professional is definitely blended during that time, and like just needing to have more grace and understanding and empathy. Like these are the fundamentals of what we learned about being a designer. And for me, it feels like those are the things that sort of make my job easier when I'm like, oh, because I should have been thinking about it this way. And I know this already, but that's just like important sort of things to come back to.
For sure. Does that ring a bell with anyone else? Does anyone want to weigh in? Any other realizations that you've had?
I can weigh in. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Fiona. I'm reading your lips. I think you said you go first. Yeah, I think like I've always thought of myself my whole entire life that I was like an introvert. Like I just wanted to have silence and be in like a dark room, but then being like being able to do that for the last 2 years, I've realized actually like how much I feed off of other people's energy, and to be able to like grow and learn just from being around other people and having the side conversations and having those coffee walks and things like that, that I am finding myself very much missing and yearning for. Yeah, it's just realizing like how much I've learned from people just by ad hoc conversations, and not having that anymore, I think kind of sucks.
I agree 100%. Fiona, oh, I think Fiona, you're frozen. Oh, there you are, you're back.
Were you talking to me? Because I was frozen.
Yes, I wanted to invite you to share your thoughts next.
Yeah. I'm going to share two things. One, that like a big realization I've had is that I can choose ownership over my life and my career. And with that, like I get to choose how it feels. I get to choose what it looks like. Like if I want it to be fun, it gets to be fun. If I want it to be something I made up, it gets to be that. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is really like, so I was a design leader prior to leaving my career, but realizing that people want to be led, like everybody wants to be led by somebody, and people really want to be led by people that are honoring their humanness and honoring their innate power. So a lot of the like old school mentality about like how to manage and lead people feels like it's been making its way out the door. And I found that to be especially true, and continue to find that to be true. Like the more you can honor people in their human experience and empower them, the more excited I'm to be led.
For sure, that rings very true. Amanda, what about you?
Yeah, I love, Fiona, that you use the word empowerment, because that's the biggest shift I've seen in the past 2 years. When you think about people's careers, we have shifted to a paradigm now in which people are no longer, if they do want to work for a company, they're not limited to working for a company that has a presence in that city for the most part. You know, you've got cities here in Austin that are companies, from different cities, different parts of the world, advertising for jobs here, like on the LinkedIn job board, but they're not for roles here. They're for roles that you can live in Austin and work remotely from here, which is profoundly empowering in terms of the just sheer number of opportunities that opens up for people. But then, yeah, at a more human level, in terms of the way employees or anybody, designer or otherwise, are being considered, you know, in the context of work and in their career, it just feels so much more human. And so I agree with you, Fiona. It feels like all of a sudden people, leaders, and businesses were held to a higher level of accountability for how they supported people through the past 2 years. And I don't think that's going to go away. At least I hope it won't. I think that expectation and accountability is going to continue, and it's going to do wonders for people's well-being and for their empowerment.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's, I hope that's true for most people who are in the audience today as well. I love that idea of that humanness and holding like leaders, companies, roles to a higher standard of empowering people. At the same time, what I've heard a lot about in the past is this idea that if you want to have a career, you have to play the game. It's like a term that I've heard regularly. You have to play the game and kind of work the system. And there's a part of me that feels like these two are at odds. There's this humanness that we want to empower, and these human truths almost that exist. And on the other hand, I'm torn into falling into this thinking of playing the game. I'd love to hear how you all have navigated this, or if that tension even exists for you, if that's something you see too, and if not, what the alternative is, or how you look at it. And I'm going to start calling out people. I'm going to put on the spot Daytriana.
So I am trying to wrestle with what I think playing the game means and then what it means like personally. So like, I think it could lean sort of like, do you get involved in like the politics of work? And that I don't have the energy for. So I really try to like find cultures that is like a very small part of. And then as far as sort of like you can be empowered to work remote, do work that you enjoy, mind your own well-being and not overextend yourself, while also being committed to like pushing your career forward. And I think I try to strike that balance. Like, I love being a designer. I also really love spending time with my wife and dog. And designing feels great, but like my family feels better. And so I'm always going to like try to make sure I'm doing my work well and efficiently so that they don't have to like bump up against each other, because I think they're both fulfilling. So I also try to find work that I enjoy. And when it starts to feel not fun, I can interrogate why. But I think as far as just like needing to talk to other people and know who you're working with, kind of to Natalie's point, some of that water cooler talk that we lost, I think we kind of feel some of that. Like I worked for remote before the pandemic. And so I think like we had a pretty good culture at Atlassian of like, or even Trello, just like we did this already. And so people were prepared for that. But I think if you're sort of transitioning to a place where that's your new culture and people have sort of diverging styles of communicating and personalities, that does kind of call for us to all sort of bend and flow or whatever. And like in the office, it wasn't great for introverts, but extroverts might have flourished. And now we're home. And maybe some people who are introverts are like, actually, I wouldn't mind seeing some folks. And that's definitely me. Like that resonated. You couldn't tell me I wasn't an introvert. And now I'm like, ambivert, maybe, because like I am craving people to collaborate with. And even if that's like in a mural, it's just like, I don't want to design on an island. And so I think you can do both as best you can, where I mostly bring my whole self to work so I don't have to do a lot of code switching, which really just tamps down how exhausting doing work can be. And then also sort of being honest about the moments where I'm like, actually, I need to step away from this, or I can't commit to a ton of evening events because I need to do this other thing, and feel comfortable knowing that I have like seasons of being hyper-focused on work and seasons of resting, and being honest about that in hopes that other people around me feel comfortable to do the same.
That was very great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I agree with Daytriana. I think that playing the game it's all about what sort of environment is that a thing. And there are toxic environments that the soonest that you can extract yourself safely from those environments, I would encourage anybody to do so, because playing the game in that sort of environment is something that will, I think, tax any of us. If I shift to thinking about a healthy environment where it's, maybe a values-driven culture, it's transparent, there aren't a lot of politics, for me, playing the game feels like I might reframe it for myself as leaning into cultivating relationships in a real way and suspending assumption that, like assuming good intent, essentially, even if somebody has a really different style from me, trying to understand where they're coming from, taking those ad hoc walks like Natalie mentioned, and just trying to get to know people. Because I find if I think about times in my life when I have effectively played the game, I think for me, what I've really done is I've just leaned into and been open to cultivating relationships, even when it's felt uncomfortable. And I haven't jived with that person like immediately, but I've come to a place of understanding.
I love that. It made me think like in trying to more so define playing the game, I'm like, I've heard often throughout my career in various roles, like getting a promotion or like advancing in your career requires people to be saying your name in rooms that you're not in. For that to happen, people have to know your name. And that is the case whether you're in person or not in person. Not being in person, I think, makes it way more difficult, actually. But if it's just like, to your point, it is about relationship building. That is a lot of the work that we do. If that's playing the game, I call it being employed. And then if you're like, well, I actually want to do this in a way that doesn't feel icky, like I'm not meeting people. I previously worked in a place where you like met people to say you met so many people. And now it's just like, this is silly. And that is what caused me to change careers. Now I'm like, I want to have coffee with you, learn about you, figure out how our work overlaps. And when we inevitably leave here and cross paths in the future, that relationship will be intact, not because it was based on me advancing my career. So I think it's just like, obviously, going to work requires some level of professionalism that is more than what we probably do at home. That is playing the game, like the not fun part. But beyond that, I think it is really just like, these are the people I work with. I want to know them. I want them to know me. And that makes it much easier to solve the problems that we're trying to solve.
Well, plus 1,000 that. I think it's hard for me to relate to that because we've been running Fun Size now, or Fun Size has been around for about 9 years. And so like, I haven't played the game in a while, but there's always one thing that I always think about, and that is like, you don't really remember the work that you did. You remember the people that you worked with, and so like that is about the fostering the relationship. Like you play the game, you buy into the hustle culture, right? Like, what do you get out of it? I think the most meaningful thing is the relationships and the people you meet and the friends that you've made along the way. And even like, like as a client agency, like people that we've met that, we've worked with in the past, like they're now clients, so it's interesting how all that works.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to dive into a little deeper is this, like, if I feel like there's something that we find or realize about ourselves, like what gives us energy, what we're drawn to, how we connect with people, how we discover our own humanness as a designer, as a person. But it can be difficult to find that sometimes. I don't think everyone is immediately clear about that, or like we go through seasons of change. And Fee, I would love to put you on the spot because I know that you've recently made a big change in your career and founded your own business. And I'd love to learn how you went about that and kind of found the thing that gave you energy, or is giving you energy right now, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably helpful context to tell you all a little bit about my previous career. So I was a graphic designer, product designer. I managed the design team and really grew out the whole design team at RigUp, which is now WorkRise. So I was in the rapidly growing startup environment. And I left about a year ago and learned a lot from the startup environment, and that I had to really spend some time building up a tolerance around being in uncertainty and pivoting. But honestly, I'd always known that I wanted to start a business, and I'd put all this pressure on myself to find my calling. I think we live in this culture that is really pushing people to find your calling. You have one thing, go find it. And I allowed my circumstances in a somewhat stable work environment to really fuel my exploration and my self-discovery. So for example, I studied, personal training. I studied landscape design. I studied a bunch of different things. And I had this desire to have a really nice, clean exit plan where I had clarity of direction. I had a fat savings account, a business plan. And honestly, when I left, I didn't really have any of that in place. But what I had developed was a lot of trust in myself, and a lot of trust that when I show up fully in my life, that opportunities unfold, and as long as I follow my joy and follow what feels good, that the opportunities arise. And that's actually worked out really well for me. And so when I left my career, I started doing interior design because that's always been a passion of mine, and quickly realized that what I actually really love doing is empowering people with the tools and frameworks for expanding themselves creatively. So it's been a lot of honestly taking what I learned from startups and deepening my trust and deepening my ability to hold uncertainty, and allowing myself to pivot, not getting too attached to a plan, not getting too attached to a goal, and just consistently checking in, what is this, how does this feel? Is this what I actually desire? I've learned that my joy is a really accurate compass. If something brings me joy, I can show up fully. And I noticed that even when I was in design leadership, for a really long time, that brought me joy, and I excelled very, very quickly. And so just learning to trust that and deepen my trust has been probably the main things.
Yeah, that's powerful. What's a practical way, like if there is a practical way to check in on your joy? Do you have practical things that you do regularly, like that are easy to share with folks?
Um, Honestly, I journal a lot. I've been journaling since I was a kid, and journaling really helps me kind of like parse through the noise of my life. And I just check in with my like feelings. Like, where do I want it when I wake up? What am I most excited to do? And a lot of times that is relationships, right? And so like what we were talking about earlier about like building those relationships and work, like that kept me thriving in my corporate career. It was like I loved showing up for my design team. So yeah, journaling's been a huge practice. And then in terms of like practically understanding or like building my trust, I let myself go down the rabbit hole of like, oh my God, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, worst thing that could happen, I don't get any clients. And then I develop a safe plan from there. Like, if I don't get any clients as a coach, okay, I can do freelance as a designer. What if I don't get any freelance as a designer? Well, I can tap into my 401k and like allowing myself to have these marks of like, okay, if worst case scenario happens, I can take care of myself, and just letting myself explore that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's kind of like a fear mapping almost, or like facing that. Um, yeah, I'd love to hear from the others. Like, what have you found, like practically, to help you find that calling or that joy, or kind of stay in touch with that? Because it can be so busy during the week, right? There's the work and there's the meeting and there's the Slack and this kind of that, and you kind of get lost. How do you keep track of what really brings the you out?
I've been practicing slow mornings. So most of my team works on the West Coast. I'm on Central Time, which means I can start my day when I want to, but I choose to kind of start closer to when they start so that I can take my dog for a long walk, listen to some music and dance around my living room, journal. If you ask for practical reasons, and I'm like, I'm fairly spiritual, so I'll do like a card pull and then journal, and that has sort of helped me find out like what actually works for me and brings me joy. And I find that what I reach for in my slow morning is probably the thing that brings me joy, separate from work, and kind of helps me clear the murkiness of whatever the previous day or week or whatever sort of has me feeling, so that I can prioritize my day in a way that kind of makes sense. And a lot of it for me comes down to just like giving myself permission to believe I know what's best for me. And if that means today I'm not opening my laptop until 2 o'clock, and I'm gonna tell my team that's what needs to happen, then I hope they understand that's how I'm gonna do my best work. And then I show up and deliver, and it makes it worthwhile. But practically, it's like I am the expert on what works for me and how I do my best work. I now have the flexibility to kind of call a few more shots about it since I got to play the game. So I try to really like leverage that flexibility. And like sometimes it feels weird or like I get anxious about it. And that's when I know it's like, you should do it. Take that day off, take a half day, tell somebody you just want to like meet and not meet about work, but just have a chat, like whatever it is to sort of like break up what can become kind of monotonous is what I try to give myself permission to do. And the more you do that, you'll find yourself saying yes to things you might not have said yes to. And maybe you won't like them, but maybe you will. And then who knows where that kind of leads you. But yeah, it's just like give yourself permission to like not have it all figured out and try something new.
I think for me, it's I always have like I keep a long to-do list, and it's most of the time it's like 90% things that I need to do. But every now and then, like I think to find my joy, like I sprinkle in something that I want to do. And so there's always one line item in my to-do list for the day that's like, I want to do this. And that could be very like varying. So like I might want to go get a manicure, or I might want to go like actually get into Figma and design something. But to be able to accomplish that, like one thing per day that I want to do, really helps me like keep my joy and find it every day.
I feel like I might offer another word too. Joy is such a beautiful one, and one that I felt a lot, and it's been a really beautiful compass. I know, like personally, I'm going through a kind of a rough season in life that is making me do a lot of internal soul searching and just inside time work which is good. But I'll say sometimes it's hard. I think when you're also contemplating potentially a career change, it can bring in a lot of fear that makes feeling the joy hard right now. And so another word I've been thinking about and marinating with is the idea of resonance, and just that really gentle feeling that maybe joy is around the corner and you don't even feel it yet, but there's like this soft whisper to go in this direction and just take this next step. And it rings so true that it resonates with you, and I'm trying to embrace that and just kind of take slow steps towards where I know like joy will come if I keep following my truth. And for me, that word is resonance, and it's really helping.
That's beautiful. I had not heard about that, but that describes it so well. I want to piggyback off of something you said about the season of change and change coming with ambiguity and risk and fear. And I think there's a big group of junior designers, folks who are new to the design industry, folks who are transitioning from a different profession into design, where there's a lot of that kind of fear and uncertainty, right? I take a risk leaving something that I know for something new. And maybe there's this resonance, and I can't quite put my finger on it. What have you all found? How do you navigate this type of ambiguity when there's something drawing you to that, but you're not really sure how to weigh the risk, how much to invest, what it exactly is? How do you go about those situations? Specifically for the design career, I should say.
I actually think I need you to repeat the question.
Yeah, so I think if I'm new to the design industry, for example, either I might be a junior designer, I might be straight out of college, or I might be someone who used to work in real estate before and found their calling in design and is now transitioning. It can be really, I think, intimidating to think about this change. And then there's this whole design ladder of going from a junior designer to maybe the mid-level, and then there's seniors, and there's all these steps and conventions, but something is dragging me there. Something is pulling me, that resonance maybe that I'm feeling. But how do you deal with that risk and uncertainty? How do you find like the energy to opt in to the ambiguity and make that change? I'd love to hear how you've gone about that. Does that make it any clearer? There was still a lot of words.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for me, like the practice I mentioned earlier about just like, what are the, like allowing myself to go into the darkness and like, okay, what if that happens? What if that happens is one thing. But also like studying my resistance a little bit more and learning to feel like when resistance is like a hard no. And a lot of times your body will tell you like, you just will not want to do something versus like resistance because it's new and it's scary. And there's usually like a tinge of excitement in there. So I'm not too sure I'm totally answering the question, but I think it is important to differentiate that sometimes like a no is actually a no and you don't have to push yourself in that direction. Whereas like no's that are like tinged in excitement are usually like the right direction because fear is just kind of like the reverse side of excitement. But in general, like also allowing myself to opt out of things, like I can try things and I can leave. Like you can start a job and you can leave it in 6 months. And the beauty about our industry is that there's like an abundance of jobs. And I am starting to see more and more opportunities for junior designers, which has been really cool.
I was gonna say something similar to Fiona, which is like just because you make a decision to do something doesn't mean you're locked into it forever. Like you can try to test your boundaries, test that fear level, figure out if you want to take that next jump, figure out what your backup plan would be, or like what some of, like if this doesn't work out, then like what else can you do? Whether or not like, that's for financial or whatnot, like whatever. But having that backup plan for yourself, I think helps a lot to kind of like overcome that fear.
Yeah, for sure. That makes me think of something. I'll be honest, I'm a little envious of like, it feels like how in tune it feels like you all are with with your intuition and with your like what brings you joy. Because I don't feel I'm that way, because I'm just and Daytrana can maybe attest to this, having worked with me, that I feel like I'm just a planner and kind of a controller, and I need to have it all written down and documented. And I think it would help me to let that go a little bit. But for folks like me who want to have this black on white before they make any decisions, do you have any recommendations for that type? Like if I approach it through more of a control lens?
I do. So I feel like I moved from being like you to where I am now. And that journey was literally one of like journaling and just being like, I want to know myself better. And then doing all the things. So I like wrote in the chat about like learning about human design, which is basically like whatever, like a framework for kind of getting to know yourself. I'm like, I know people hate frameworks. Sometimes I do too, and like personality types or whatever, but it's basically supposed to help you work in flow. And what I like to say is like, if something works for you, roll with it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Human design works for me. But I think practically, like when I transitioned from consulting to design, I lived in DC at the time. So I understood that like, if this was in like 2013, most of the design I wanted to do was happening on the coast. And so I'm like, okay, do I make a move from DC? I don't know, New York isn't that far. So I'm like, okay, practically, what can I do to not blow up what is a pretty nice, stable life? Like my family's like, why are you going back to school? Which most families would not ask, but they're like, I don't understand why you would leave a good job and a nice place, whatever. So I'm like, yeah, okay, but I'm not in flow. This doesn't feel good for me. I don't want to just check off people I've met. And so I was like, what can I do to sort of dive into something else? I'm not quitting my job. I'm just going to learn. So I went to General Assembly and like took their immersive UX course and used that to like make a portfolio and to meet people. And then in meeting those people, I just like got feedback from them because they already worked in design, and just used that as a way to kind of build a community where I already was around design. That little thing I did was like what opened the door to literally where I am today. Like I met the people who wrote me recommendation letters to go to grad school, introduced me to people when I got waitlisted, like all the things, all the risks, it was there. And I was like, practically, what can I do to set myself up so that I can say I did everything I could to make this like a smooth transition. And so in doing that, you start to remove some of the ambiguity because you create that clarity. And so in like just being who you are, you do your research, feel confident that you would not set yourself up for failure knowingly. And like you're going to be thorough because it's your journey. And you do that a couple times and you're like, okay, this worked out 1 time, 2 times, 10 times. And that I think is sort of how I got to where I am today, where I'm very much in agreement with Fiona that like most of the time, if I follow what feels nice for me working wise and people who I enjoy working with, things fall into place. That does require preparation and it requires you to come to the table with skills that people want. I do not discredit those things because they're big things, but I imagine if you made it to this call, like you have many things to offer, know what those things are, figure out how they translate to where you're trying to go. Like at the time I was a consultant and I did a lot of writing, a lot of strategy. That's kind of what I do now. Like I do some design like in Figma, but I mostly spend time in Google Docs and like facilitating and corralling people to go on a journey and create a vision with me. And that's what I get excited about. Like I'm excited telling you all about this. So like, yeah, I feel like you can just like start with small steps, figure out what's within your grasp of resources, use those things to sort of build up to that big thing. I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but I'd never designed anything. So what work was I going to present to them? I couldn't sort of like jump 10 steps ahead. I just gave myself permission for it to be a slow journey or my journey, which is however long it's going to be. And that's like, that has to be fine. It wasn't comfortable all the time, many naysayers, but you know you and you know your process. Try to apply that process to whatever it is that you're trying to uncover.
For sure. Anyone have anything to add to that?
I do. I'm always gonna have things to add. So pardon me.
Love it.
I love what Daytrana was talking about, just like getting to know yourself. I think that's super important. Like in terms of deepening your intuition, like the baseline of, or like what really like helps you deepen your intuition is like building self-trust. And one of the greatest ways to build self-trust is to like keep your promises to yourself. And it seems like if you're a planner and like you have that kind of mindset, you're probably already good at like matching deadlines and reading deadlines and keeping promises. And I think it's more about like making new promises and like moving from like outcome oriented things to like non-outcome oriented things, like just making a promise to, like, one thing I know people love is like a non-planned Sunday, where like you leave your house every Sunday with no plan, and you just like let your intuition guide you. So yeah, making like more abstract promises, putting yourself in like new experiences, doing things just because you love it, not because you need to like accomplish anything. And yeah, just trying new things, I think, is the biggest thing.
That's great. I've never done, or I haven't done a no plan Sunday recently. I'll need to do that maybe this weekend. That sounds great. So I think that's super powerful, but I also wonder when I look at job postings, the ones that we post, for example, we have all these skills listed, and we have the job posting is like, feels like it's 2,000 words, and there's all these qualifications. And there are kind of really like rigid roles and paths sometimes that I follow, and maybe my passion doesn't, or my drive doesn't fit squarely into that. What have you found, and the same accounts, I think, for internal moves, like we have growth plans where you have different profiles and levels. What have you found successful in either fitting in or maybe widening those roles and advocating for more flexible definitions, whether it's in an application or it's in an internal move? Has anything worked for you there?
I might chime in, about job descriptions. I will say job descriptions, they either mean a lot or they don't mean a lot. And by that, I mean, most of the time, you're going to meet a hiring manager and they're going to have like two things that are really important that are just kind of non-negotiables for that role. Like, you could be the best designer, but they really need a strong storyteller because there's some tough stakeholders involved and they need you to bring them on the journey. And that's hard to relay in a job description. I wish, as a TA function, that we could just make it 2 lines, like here are the like non-negotiables, because that's the reality of most positions. So I would say, for especially those that are thinking about applying for a job or feeling limited by what's written in the job description, just kind of throw it out the window and apply. The thought I had earlier, Giannis, to your question about the idea of planning and worrying kind of about a future map, I would encourage folks to spend time in as many authentic conversations as you can with people who work at companies or on teams that you admire, and create space for yourself to hone your craft and to figure out what you're great at and cultivate that. And you're going to have the right conversation that's going to be a match. It's not going to come at you through a job description. I know that can be tough. They are, unfortunately, just by nature, a little bit oppressive, like the long text and many bullets and whatnot, but they're usually not very true to form for what that team's actually looking for. So the biggest advice is just kind of take it with a grain of salt. And if the job's compelling, apply to it and just try to have authentic conversations with people that are on that team so you can understand what problems they're trying to solve.
I love that. Yeah. And I love that idea also of reducing it to the essence, like at least for myself, of what are the non-negotiables, maybe what are the non-negotiables for me in what I'm looking for from a job. Yeah, authentic conversations. That's awesome. We've got a couple questions in the chat, so I'm going to skip and start to post some questions from the audience. Janine, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, is asking, how do you follow your intuition with no regard to the outcome when your supervisors are expecting results? I think that's a great question. Actually, there's a second part. I've been following my intuition for a while, but I'm not sure how much longer they will tolerate it.
I do want to pop in that when I said that, I think I mostly meant like as a practice to do outside of work. Obviously, when you're in work, communication is key. I made a lot of decisions in startup worlds and in various environments that were intuitive, but like I always included people in the conversation. And And I always had, research to back it up, or information to back it up. People don't want to make very expensive decisions off of your intuition. And so allowing your intuition to be the ping that like leads you in the direction of research, or leads you in the direction to validate that, and including people in that process, I think is really important. And allow yourself to be wrong. Like, my intuition has a lot of really bad ideas too. And so like including people in on that and doing research against it is what's going to get people to buy in.
For sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, like, I definitely don't recommend following your intuition with no regard for the outcome at work or in your personal life, really. Like, I think your intuition cares about the outcome, is not gonna set you up to just like set it all ablaze. But what I do think is like, if you are chartering into uncharted territory, doing so in a way that is small, so that you can make like quick progress. Build up your progress to whatever the bigger thing is. To my point of saying, like, start with what resources you have, see how you can use those, kind of like experimenting. And in that way, you're taking, I think, some of what we do in design, which is like, let's start with this little thing, something that is going to solve somebody's problem, delight them a little bit, and we're going to learn something. That it's kind of how I'm approaching, like, if I'm trying something new, I don't need to go full throttle. Like, let's just dip our toe in, see how this is going, and build up to something bigger. And I think doing that with your intuition will sort of like lead to greater outcomes and returns.
That's great. Yeah, I love the idea of those small steps. There's a question from Claire in the chat. Thinking about your career path as a designer from the beginning to where you are now, what's a piece of advice you would give to your younger self or another young designer? And I'm actually really interested, Amanda, to hear your response to that as a designer, not in a design role.
I'm so sorry, I was responding to a question in the chat. Can you repeat the advice for more junior designers?
Yeah, to your younger self. Like, what advice would you give your younger self or another younger designer?
I would remind myself, I'm going to spend so much of my life in a job. I would do everything I possibly could to cultivate more time and space to figure out what does bring me joy and what resonates, and get really, really good at it. And if that means I have to get a job that I just don't care about that much, that I still do great work in, but I make money to survive and to like do my thing and still go home at night and like cultivate my craft, I would do that. I probably didn't give myself a month to do that out of college. And I immediately got into a career path that I love, and I'm lucky to be in it. Is it probably my dream job forever? No. I would give myself a year to explore a lot of different pathways and like truly cultivate a skill before I set myself down like a 30, 40-year career path, because we've got a lot of time to spend in jobs.
For sure. What about the others? What advice would you give your younger self?
I haven't finessed this answer at all, but something along the lines of like, the world needs your voice, and not just like you pushing pixels, but like you to be opinionated and show up with your values and like bring that to your work. Because so early in my career, I feel like I was just so caught up in like, oh my gosh, I didn't study like traditional graphic design, and now I need to just do all things visual design. And it's like, actually, that's just not the thing I care the most about. It does not bring me the most joy. I like spending a little time in Figma that's very focused, because I did all the things up front to make this time very clear. So for me, it's just like, when you, like, I think as you progress in your design career, if you have a desire to sort of go up that ladder, or even if you work for yourself and you're doing more like consulting, it is just about like engaging with other people. And doing that, like having a good conversation, is like really rooted to me in like psychological safety and being able to express myself wholly. And I think the only way you kind of get comfortable doing that is like doing it even when it's scary. Today, I had a moment, like a full circle moment this morning, like, oh, wow, we have a call tonight. I'm like, oh my gosh, 3 years ago, I would have been going berserk, like, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious, all this. And I was like, you're literally not nervous. Like, can you just take a moment and like pat yourself on the back, because you just kept showing up and doing this. And like, we made it. I did not see this when I started grad school. It felt very far off. And so it's like, literally, if you have a desire to do it and like, I think I could put together a plan, you can do it, but you like bring you to it, because that's what's going to make you stand out and memorable relative to everyone else who has a rockin' portfolio. But it's like, what problem did you solve? So for me, it's really just about like bringing you to your work, and hopefully you're in a place where you can do that. If you're not, my secondary advice is find a place where you can do that or create it.
I think for me, like when I was younger and fairly naive, I always thought like there's this grandiose vision in my head, right? Of like, all right, when I hit 50, like I can look back on my career and say that I was successful. Like there was like this weird perspective for me of like what success meant. And it kind of felt like chasing a rainbow this whole entire time. But the older I get, the more I realize that like the definition of your success can change with the season of life that you're in. It's not like something that you have to go and grab and you look back on, you know, like when you're older and say, I was successful. You can be successful, like you can be a month in and look back and be like, I was successful in giving myself space to like breathe, room to rest, things like that. And so like, I don't know if it was just my own vision of what success meant to me, but like, I just, yeah, like my advice to my younger self would be just to give yourself space to like change and be who you are and adapt to who you are in that moment of your life. And that the idea of success doesn't have to be fixed. It can just grow with you as you grow.
I love that. I love that idea of the idea of that the idea of success can grow, can change, and you can define that for yourself. Natalie, I've got one follow-up question for you. Oh, and I see Amanda's already typing. When running an agency or in a hiring position, I guess this is broader, do you feel choosing not to hire remote designers might be limiting the pool of designers that might be a great fit?
Yeah, definitely. I think when we first started, we were pretty like hyper focused on Austin because we were building a culture around being in the office together, and like we have like just a bunch of activities, right? But I think we're realizing now, and we're still honestly like trying to adapt to like this new environment, but we are hiring outside of Austin now. I think we just need to be better at being able to accommodate those situations and being able to still be inclusive and make people feel like they're a part of the team, even though they're not here. And I think that's something that we're still struggling with a little bit, but hopefully we'll figure it out. But we do, that is a realization, like for sure, you know.
On the flip side, I think your honesty about like making sure you can accommodate that is super important, because I think there's this big push for everyone to allow people to be remote. And when it's not done well, it can be more isolating, I think. So I think it's important to kind of like prepare, and for people who are hiring to remote roles to like really make sure in your interview process, you're also interrogating like what processes and rituals and things exist so that you do feel connected to the people you work with and the broader sort of company. Because I think we don't need to be like hyper attached to our companies, but I think again, sort of that human connection thing separate from work, it's nice to sort of have that sort of baked in. And I have had experiences where that wasn't the case and it just gets really uncomfortable. And so I think we're all sort of like leveling up our remote engagement practices and things that we do. And I can certainly be better at that myself, but it's a learning curve for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Awesome. We're almost out of time. Amanda, Fiona Fee, Natalie, thank you so much for making time for us tonight and sharing your experience and your wisdom and your truth with us and showing up so fully and vulnerably. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone in the audience who joined today. We really appreciate you too. And of course, thank you to Chris and all of our Austin Design Week volunteers for making this possible and for making Austin Design Week happen and for giving us this great venue to connect with the design community. Chris, do you have any closing words? I'll hand it over to you.
I was going to say thank you, Giannis, and the whole panel and everyone attending this evening. And as a designer, I mean, I've just been blown away just absorbing all this. And I mean, there's just so much. I don't even know what to say. There's just so much inspiration, so much just like talking about being a human and kind of let it all soak in, but also giving it your all. There's just so many good takeaways, and I hope everyone else felt that way too. And be sure to check out more events like this in person and virtual, tomorrow and Friday. Thanks everybody for joining.
It was so great. Thanks for
Thanks.
having us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, y'all.